Hello, everyone. It is great to see you again. This is Dr. Lori on Coach's Corner and
JDP, and you are excellent. Today, we're talking to Diane Thompson, who is an ADHD coaching professional. We're going to get really into what ADHD is and how it manifests in adults versus kids. Lori, do you have anything that you're anticipating in this conversation?
I am really hoping, and I think you'll get out of this, folks who are out there listening, how do I spot this in my clients? How do I make referrals? What can partnering with someone like Diane do for my client?
Amazing. So with that, let's get into it. First, I want to say welcome to Diane.
Thank you very much for having me.
First and foremost, can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Sure, I'd be happy to. And this is what I share with new clients when I first meet them, that I am a ADHD executive function coach. I do not have ADHD. And I like to put that up front so that they understand that I can still coach them and understand them. And then I give them this background that I'll say my second career was as a professional organizer. I went into people's homes and helped them organize not just their stuff, but their lives, setting up, getting their bills paid, managing their papers, and then, of course, decluttering, working through creating systems for their homes. But in that process, and my clients were in deep, so I saw them regularly, weekly or biweekly. But what would show up is that in between our appointments, they had tasks and jobs to do for themselves to continue the work. And they were either not able to do it, or I would return and the mess would be returned, or more chaos would be present. And so I come from my first career as a dance movement therapist working in psychiatric facilities. So I had this idea that I should be able to help people and help them learn skills. After all, I worked with some pretty complex individuals in my career, but I wasn't being successful in transferring those skills. I was not an organizer who wanted to make people's homes pretty. I wanted to make their lives better. So I, luckily, was exposed to this Coach Approach Training Institute program that was originally designed for professional organizers to better help their clients. One of the co-directors, founders, was one of the first professional organizers in the industry 35 years ago. So I, like you said, I mentioned earlier, Lori, you found your home in coaching. I went to this presentation at a conference and I was like, that's it. I signed up for the full 2-year program on the spot. And that was then what led me to understanding ADHD, because why are people disorganized? Because of their executive function challenges. And so that was what I was not tapping into the understanding of working with my organizing clients. So let's see, today, 14 years later now, I had no longer organized people, and that was a pandemic, result from the pandemic, but I was happy to become a full-time coach. So here I am today.
Say, Diane, and I know Lori has questions, but I just got to get this question out before I give Lori a turn. Can you help me understand what exactly is ADHD? Because that is, I feel, it's misunderstood generally, right? Mm-hmm. So some people would very casually say, "Oh, my ADHD is kicking in," or my OCD, and all these terms. But help us understand what exactly is ADHD.
I'm so glad you asked that question, because we do live in a world where suddenly we're quick to diagnose or categorize and pigeonhole a behavior.
Yep.
And OCD is a real sore point for people who actually have obsessive compulsive disorder. That is a traumatic disorder. That is not just someone who has to pick up a glass every time they put it down. So with ADHD, similarly, people very popularly, meaning popular psychology perspectives, is oh, I'm having trouble focusing. I'm doing too many things at once. I can't pay attention. Well, of course, in our very demanding, attention heavy environment and world we live in today, many of us have a hard time staying focused without getting sidetracked. So, and that's a whole nother conversation, but the actual diagnosis of ADHD is classically attention deficit hyperactive disorder. And then they identify preferences inattentive or hyperactive. Now that is determined by, and you may or may not know, the DSM-5, which is the Diagnostic Statistical Manual that the American Psychiatric Association puts out for professional mental health professionals to be able to have language and evaluation process to determine what is how to diagnose. Anyway, I could go down that rabbit hole. I'm going to try not to, because it is a rabbit hole. There's a lot of controversy around that. So there are a few researchers, leaders in the field of ADHD, and two of them I will mention to tell you what more clearly what ADHD is. One, William Dodson, refers to it as an interest-based nervous system, which is really one's attention goes to what one is interested in. So we don't just think your brain thinking, we think about the whole body. We feel in our body. What are we interested in? That activates the action toward it. So video games is a great example for kids, adults too, but that one would much rather play a video game than do their homework. And so, and the struggle with that is on a neurobiological level, that the neurotransmitters of the brain of someone with ADHD are what we refer to as glitchy. They're not moving nice and smooth from cell to cell, from neuron to neuron. They're getting bogged up. They're getting stuck. And so that results in not being able to activate, not be able to focus. It's the behavioral manifestation of that really neurobiological piece. So going back to the interest-based nervous system, not to get too deep down a rabbit hole, that it's hard to get motivated to do something that doesn't generate interest. So hence that's the attention piece. So then I'll throw in another researcher, Ned Hallowell. He's written a number of books. He says it's not a matter of not having attention, and I may be butchering the quote a little bit, but it's about how one allocates the attention. So it's this is what I'm interested in, connecting it to that interest-based nervous system. Therefore, this is where my attention goes. And then forgetting about all the other responsibilities of life or putting them off. So you see, ADHD is not just around attention. It's not the simplicity of I can't focus or pay attention. It's not everybody's not hyperactive, but it's a big picture, a big etiology of behaviors that evolve out of that glitchy neurotransmission piece. I could say more, but I'm going to stop.
I'm actually going to pick up on this because I think this is a logical transition from where you and John were. And that is, we often think about ADHD as, with kids and in schools. And I'm really interested in both in your work with kids, but also in how somebody identifies this in an adult, because we talked about this earlier, right? In my generation, certainly there was no diagnosis like this. And so people were quirky, right? Or, whatever people said. And then that has carried on into their work life, right? And into their home life. And what would be things that might trigger a visit to somebody like you, a visit to somebody who would diagnose it? How do I know I'm not just quirky?
Mm-hmm. Right. Yeah, that it goes back to that thing of I'm just ADHD. we quickly judge it. We don't know. And so what triggers it usually is something that is what one is unhappy about.
Okay.
Or what one's spouse, partner, or parent, well, you want to just talk about adults now,
Either
what
way.
one's spouse or partner is unhappy about. And so with the adult, it may be that they're not paying a bill on time, or it's their job to pay the bills, and they're not being done, and the spouse gets angry, or the the executive who's not submitting his expense reports because that's too hard of a task for the ADHD individual to get motivated to do, then that costs money for the family. So all these kinds of situations, you forgot to take out the garbage again, these kinds of discord. And so right now I have 2 male clients, husbands, came to me because their wives did the research and their wives said, hey, there's this thing that I'm reading about ADHD. I'm learning about ADHD. Now, I've had husbands come to me being resentful, and that we would have to work through whether they were really willing to address it. Luckily, the 2 I have now are just delightful men who are like, yeah, there's something not right here. The other way that people identify it as an adult is when their children get diagnosed and they're sitting in the doctor's office and they're listening to the description of the child's behavior, and they go, wow, that was me when I was young. Oh, that's me now. And that is very common because ADHD is highly, highly genetic, like 75% genetic. And so that is a very common situation.
Diane, you're blowing my mind over here because, as Lori indicated, typically when we hear about ADHD, we hear it more ascribed to children, teenagers, right? And not adults. And sometimes in my own experience, I feel like, wow, some behaviors, as you said, seem to me like it's pain avoidance, right? Where it's like, I have like the case of the executive with the expense reports. I got to do this. Oh, this is a real pain in the butt. Let me put this off until like the last minute. Are there characteristics that one can kind of use to self-evaluate to say, gee, maybe I should seek some counsel or help because I may have ADHD, like clinically?
That's a good question. There is unfortunately, right now I can't pull up in my memory the name of the test. There is a quiz to at least get some sense of, yes, this happens to me. No, this doesn't happen to me, to then rate oneself to say, ooh, I maybe should consider this seriously. And unfortunately, I'd have to dig in my files to pull up the name of it, so I won't waste the time. The things to think about, unfortunately, one, and I would love to be able to talk about executive functions at some point today, but I'm going to roll one in right now. The executive function part of the brain, the thinking part of the brain, and the prefrontal cortex is where it is, I like to refer to as offline or glitchy with ADHD. And they're weaker. They aren't fully activated with ADHD, again, because of that chemical biological issue. So one of these executive functions is emotional self-regulation and self-reflection. And so I'll put a key on that self-reflection piece right now, because when one's attention is quickly shifting from one place to the next and externally, that ability to self-reflect, pause and think about themselves and what they're doing is limited. A lot of my work is to help build that ability to pause and reflect. Why did I bring that in to answer your question? because you have to have that ability to be able to notice that these symptoms are occurring in your life. One of my trainers, my mentor, is Cameron Gott. He is a amazing ADHD coach. He trained me. I get to co-teach with him now. But he emphasizes cause and effect. Cause being that executive function challenges, but the effect is the behaviors, like you said, John, what behaviors show up. But if you're not noticing that the behaviors are showing up, it's like a catch-22. How do you know? So you have to count on somebody outside of you pointing out, hey, you're late for work all the time. This isn't okay. Now, am I saying that? So I'm not saying that no one can ever self-reflect and say there's something wrong here, but it really comes from getting that feedback from the outside world often that helps them identify that there's something wrong. But here's the other catch. They know something's wrong. You know, there's this statistic that by the age of 10, kids with ADHD get 20,000 more negative messages than kids without it, right? So they know something is wrong, but because the executive functions are weak and that ability to think things through needs to be developed, they're like, but I don't know what I'm doing wrong.
Mm.
And so that a lot of what clients come to coaching with, especially when they're newly diagnosed, shame, confusion, and a sense of they can't match, they're not good enough.
So I want to pick up on this, but I want for those of you who are watching, we will put the link to the quiz that Diane mentioned in the commentary, and we will make sure that you have that, because I think that's a really useful tool, even if people, and most of us, right? It's hard to see when you're in the midst of things. It's hard to see and understand what you're in the midst of until you know, and what I'm hearing from you, Diane, is that the people who get help oftentimes are people who have somebody in their life, a parent, a spouse, a colleague at work, a very understanding boss, right? Who says, you know, you're really bright, Lori. Something's holding you back, right? And people who have that person in their lives are really blessed and fortunate to have somebody in their life who helps them get to somebody like you and others who can support them. So I want to take you back to where you wanted to go, which was to executive function, because this is really interesting to me with my own background. And I think it might be really helpful to our listeners to understand what executive function is and why that's so critical for us to be successful as kids, but as adults, as partners, as productive and successful employees or entrepreneurs or business leaders. It's a term that I think a lot of people aren't familiar with. Mm-hmm. What is it?
Right.
Help us with that.
Yeah, great. Love to. And I think this will answer John's question before, like, what do you see? And so the thing about defining executive functions is that there's different, theorists, leaders in the field who use different language or different categories to describe them. Okay. But they're all saying the same thing, just using a little bit of different construct, so to speak. And so I like to, I repeat a phrase that another psychologist, Ari Tuckman, who's written a lot about this, says, I simplify it to, it's the ability to do the right thing at the right time.
Whoa, let's take a pause for a second.
Yeah.
Let's just take a pause for a second, because while that seems like a no-brainer to a lot of people, mm-hmm. My own experience tells me it's not actually that common, right?
Right.
And there are many people, as I reflect back on my own personal life, that don't always get what it is to do the right thing at the right time. So Let's take a pause for a second for our listeners and for us to acknowledge what that is.
I'm just sitting here going, yep, yes, yes.
Who's on, teacher?
Go on. And so it's really fascinating for me because as you're speaking, my mind is going to my own behaviors. And Lori and I have kind of talked about this in terms of my own experience. And some ways, those decisions and that struggle is happening even in my own brain and my own experience. So, Diane, my question is, from a coaching perspective, then, if a client takes the quiz and says, gee, maybe, or recognizes that there's something wrong with or from the results of the quiz says, gee, you may be on, I don't know if the right terminology, spectrum or whatever, but you may have ADHD. What then, when they come to you, is your process for those initial interviews?
Okay. Yeah, great. And I will just say that we don't usually refer to ADHD on a spectrum. That's usually reserved for autism or a neurodiversity. But there is a phrase, you've met one person with ADHD, you've just met one person with ADHD, meaning that not everybody, it does not look the same for everybody. In fact, it's very individualized. And so just to keep that in mind. So people, when they come to me, often have had an official diagnosis, but not always. They'll say, I suspect I might have ADHD. I took that quiz or whatever, right? And so I need to address with them what would be the value of getting an official diagnosis first. And that is an important thing to determine for someone who does not have a diagnosis, because with a diagnosis, it benefits our experience. We know what we're working with. We don't have to guess or talk around something. But I don't think it's not for me as a coach 100% necessary to get that diagnosis, because in our work together, they may come to the determination that, okay, now it's time for me to find out for sure.
I want to tie you back for a quick hot second, because in thinking about what you do with clients initially, I want to tie you back to the executive function question, because I'm guessing there's some assessment on your part and some discussion with the client about the behaviors they're seeing and others are seeing that might result from not doing the right thing at the right time. Am I on track?
They're very quick to come to where their deficits are, because they see them as deficits. So like traditional coaching, not traditional, but other types of coaching, we look for the strengths, we acknowledge the strengths, we roll them into the process of growth. But they're quick to say where things are going wrong. And so we explore that. And then the distinction with ADHD coaching is we then bring in education around ADHD to help them understand what's happening. Sometimes I'll go through a very didactic, this is what executive functions are, which truthfully can be super boring for them. But I currently am going to go through a Understand Your Brain, Get More Done workbook by Ari Tuckman with a client, because he's so new to it. He doesn't understand. And he's in this regret of, why didn't people tell me this when I was a child, which is also what we work through. But so I may go through that workbook.
I saw your eyes light up talking about this, and it's obviously something that brings you a lot of passion. And I want to hear more about it. So, okay. Kind of linking those back together and how that shows up and how that plays out in your coaching.
Thank you. And I want to point out that what I just did was I realized I was going down a different path. I had self-reflection. I was able to stop myself and bring myself back by saying, Lori, where was I? So that kind of self-reflection may not be a strength for someone with ADHD. So that's an executive there. That's a show how executive function shows up.
Yeah.
Not that I'm always perfect at that, just to say. I'm going to give an example of a client. Part of his ADHD symptoms. Oh, wait, no, I know where I didn't want to go. I just want to say this about getting a diagnosis. This is important.
Great.
A diagnosis is not, one does not really diagnose by neuropsychological testing. Not a little quiz. I've had clients come to me and say, oh, they diagnosed me. I said, how long did you meet with them? 30 minutes. No, so a diagnosis of true evaluation is a 2-hour evaluation, talking with parents or spouses, or when it's children getting, or even young adults getting report cards or finding out what teachers say. So it's like a full, you want to look for a pattern that's happening. And so that's why and diagnoses with neuropsych testing, as you may know, it can be very expensive, which is why we also look at, is this something you really need to spend money on right now? So I just wanted to go back to that piece.
Thank you.
Back to the executive function. So I'm going to refer to a client who he's very verbal. ADHD individuals tend to be very verbal. Very much what we've heard of verbal processing, and providing context, telling stories, giving the full picture of everything is really important to them emotionally. But at work, in a meeting, when somebody just wants to hear the bottom line of what your plan is, that doesn't go over really big. And I have a client who has very negative work experiences in his leadership in response to him. But he's like, I just got to get it done. I've got to do it. I've got to do it. And just tries harder, not understanding, not being able to reflect on what's actually happening. I started to say to him, can you find a way to put a period at the end of your sentences? So that he would start to think about what he was saying and be able to stop long enough to then reflect. And so, that is one example of like what I do in the coaching that may reflect something from outside in his real life. Yeah. Planning is huge. The ability to plan is huge. And I work on that with a lot of my clients because what's not happening in their lives, again, the ability to do the right thing at the right time. Planning brings in a multitude of executive functions. One is understanding time and time passing. Because ADHD is an experience of living in the now, there isn't a felt sense around time passing. It's like moment to moment to moment. So what's happening now? And so think about the idea of taking a list of things that one has to do in their life and then thinking about not only when they can do it, but how long something's going to take them. That's where their brain goes, or I'm overwhelmed, I can't do this. It's like fog. I describe it as fog. It doesn't make sense to me. And so the ability to take a task list and think, oh, this is a priority because it has to be done by a certain time, is a lot of executive function work. One of the things that always fascinates me, and I will say as being someone without ADHD, I work hard to put myself in their shoes to imagine their lived experience. How I experience that now, so I know I'm sidetracking, reflection. but I'm going to say this. Once I went to menopause and started to have memory issues and started to have foggy brain, I was like, oh, this is what my clients are talking about. Mm-hmm. So it is super important to be able to appreciate the lived experience of someone. So I just want to put that there. Now, let me go back to, help me.
Executive functions.
Yes, and the example of time management and planning. So looking at getting something done, okay, so let's say I walk through what I feel is very logical, when they're going to do something, when do they have time, etc. But then you have to come to that moment of time and execute what the plan was. But that means being able to activate. Self-activation is an executive function, dependent on dopamine. If that executive function, if those neurotransmitters are kind of quiet and sleepy, that ability to get one's clothes on and go walk on a treadmill because that's what you decided you needed to exercise, that's going to be super hard to do. There's going to be a lot more interesting things that pulls one, TV, video games, etc. Another executive function is that ability to break down things into steps. So you see this with students when they're given long-term assignments. Now, teachers in middle school will break those assignments down and say, do this part by this date, etc. When they get into high school, they're supposed to be able to manage, chunk it into pieces, do it gradually so that by the due date, they're done. But that thinking process isn't innate. It has to be taught. So what activates is urgency. You've all heard the stories of college kids writing their 10-page paper from midnight to 6 a.m. and handing it in at 7 a.m. And John seems to relate to this. Yeah.
No, I don't relate to that at all.
Right. So you have your normal college kid, and then you have your college kids with ADHD. But that's an example of the inability to map things out, think about how long something's going to take, activate around it. And then here's another executive function, maintaining effort, sustaining effort. Oh, I'm going to work on this from 7 to 9 tonight. But by 7:30, like, yeah, I'm done with this. I need to go get a drink or whatever. I don't want to do this anymore. I'm tired. So coaching around what do they know about their attention span? What do they need what do they need to revive, to recuperate? What can they expect of themselves? So then strategizing what works for them, learning about their executive functions. I hope that whole thread was logical to you.
This is, I am literally enraptured by, I am learning literally every second that you talk. So thank you.
Lovely.
I want to bring it a little bit more from executive function to the actual world that we live in. In the lead up to this conversation, I spent time on the internet kind of doing some research and came across this one video, and it was humorous. But it was this person that said, a day in the life of my ADHD. And it starts off with the mom saying, hey, can you go to your room and get your laundry and bring it here? And then this person went and they're in the kitchen. Now they went to the room. On the way to the room, they went to the bathroom and then started doing something. And from the bathroom, they went to another room and another room and another room. Finally get to their bedroom. Like, why am I here? Oh, yeah, the laundry. But wait a minute, I need to do this. I need to do this. I need to do this. And so in the process of this video, this person was also being bombarded by their social media and messaging and this and that and their environment. So is that a common manifestation of ADHD, and how do we then manage our lives? Because today we tend to have all of these different devices competing for our attention.
Yeah, it's a great question. And I do get such a kick out of those social media posts and cartoons and stuff. And I know a lot of clients, when they see them, they just feel so validated when they get to see that. Yeah, so here that is, I'm going to go to another little brain-based scientific thing or research thing. I don't know if either of you ever listened to Andrew Huberman from the Huberman Lab. He's this neurobiologist out of Stanford, and he gives these 2-hour podcasts on all these aspects of human life. But he talks about ADHD, and I listened to one recently where he reminded me that the dopamine aspect of the brain, and when there's sufficient dopamine, it allows the brain to filter out all those stimuli and narrow one's focus. And I always refer to being non-ADD and what they refer to as neurotypical, but I don't like to use that phrase because then it defines someone as typical and not typical, and it's just not reflective of difference. But I do this thing where I'm very sagittal. I move forward and I don't see anything around me. I got a goal. I'm going to, But with ADHD, the view is wide. And so all of that is taken in and distracts. So the course of getting their laundry, it's not a straight path. I'm getting my laundry. It's, the whole squirrel, joke.
Right.
And all of it grabs the attention, but they're not filtering it out to remember, I'm going to get my laundry. So, and then there's this element of not being able to recall where they started from. Mm. So even remember, again, in this conversation, I have these moments of, wait, where am I? Help me get back on track. Those moments is what we try to build together. So that lesson of, or that skill of pausing, reflecting. And so ADHD is treated with stimulant medication, very effective for many, not everyone, but many. We want to treat the body and the brain well with sleep, exercise, and diet. Super important. That supports the executive functions. Then the coaching aspect is, how do you pay attention to yourself when it's a challenge to? How do you build that skill in? Some people set timers for every 15 minutes, and this timer stops. Then they have to remember, why did that timer go off? Why did I set it? I'm supposed to stop and reflect. What am I doing right now? Asking that question, because when you stop and pause, that gives that chance for the executive functions to actually work, and one gets to reflect. And here's where the coaching comes in so well, because what are we in coaching? We ask clients to be curious. We are curious coaches asking questions to stimulate their insight and awareness. So I ask the clients, stop and be curious. Are you doing what you intended to do 10 minutes ago? Are you still on track? What do you need right now? Do you need to go to the bathroom? Do you need to eat something? Because there is a very strong component of hyperfocus with ADHD. That's that it's not a deficit of attention. It's the ability to, the focusing attention on one thing at one time. And so the hyperfocus is, I'm interested, I'm in it, I'm going deep. Research, loving the research. And then I've clients plenty of times to tell me, I forget to go to the bathroom, I forget to drink water, I forget to eat. They're so in it. I'm right in the now. I'd love to be able to get there. I would love to have that kind of focus. I don't. But so there is this whole piece in the coaching process of developing that skill. They come to coaching with this very misunderstood concept, because we live in a world where we have apps and tools and tips and tricks that I'm going to teach them some special trick and they're going to be able to be successful in getting to work on time. And they're so disappointed probably on some level that I say, no, it's about you learning to pause and think. And they're like, what? Right, exactly. And they're confused. Like, how am I supposed to pay attention when I can't pay attention? And so that's why having these external reminders and building that in, and this is where mindfulness and meditation comes in, really is very valuable as well.
So this is great. I love where you ended because this was just what was on my mind. And that is, a client comes to you for coaching, you work with them. What are some indicators to you and to the client that the coaching has been successful?
I knew you'd have asked that question. The thing about living with ADHD is consistency is a challenge. So we don't define success as living life perfectly and always, let's say, always being to work on time or always remembering to bring out the garbage on time. Yeah. But we look at, do they feel confident in the understanding of their ADHD and their strategies for living with it? Have they set up supportive structures and people and environments in their lives that understand them? Is their partner, their spouse, their parent, are they on board with supporting them? And are they practicing behaviors that support their functioning on a relatively regular basis?
I love this answer because what you did for me, and I suspect for many people who are listening, is to calibrate this, that the goal is not perfection. We're not going to wave a magic wand and everything's going to be perfect. The goal is to set up structures for yourself. And, and it's not going to be easy all the time. And you have to learn to support yourself and set up these structures. So I really appreciate that calibration of, what does it mean to be successful in this work for your client and for you?
Say, Diane, I do have a question. Mm-hmm. In the few minutes that we have remaining, what is it that you would recommend for our listeners to do if they're listening to this? They're getting insights into ADHD, how it manifests in adults. What steps do you recommend they take if they're like me? I'm sitting here going, "Oh, okay, I'm checking a lot of these boxes. What do I do next?"
There are so many resources out there. I would start with going to chadd.org, which is CHADD.org. Pretty sure it's .org. Again, show notes. We'll put confirm this in show notes. The name of it has changed, but it is rich in resources and opportunities, learning. So to start to read about ADHD from the professionals, from the experts. Another great resource is Attitude Magazine, and that's ADDITUDE, mag.com. It is the articles there are written by top experts in the field, and they have an article for everything. So if you just put a word in the search bar, diagnose, ? You'll get tons of articles. They also have weekly webinars that are free. So what I'm saying is, do that work of learning about it and utilize these free resources. And going to social media, TikTok, Instagram, etc., that can be fun, but you also have to be careful because people can be misrepresenting it. Or again, one person with ADHD is one person with ADHD, so you don't want to generalize.
Yeah, that's a big takeaway for me today, Lori.
Yeah, I want to just jump in and make a point for our fellow coaches that are listening. One of the things in our coaching program that we were taught is not necessarily stay in your lane, but there are times when it is appropriate to refer a client for additional support, right? Whether that's mentoring, counseling, or somebody like Diane, right, who can support them in a different way. So can you speak for just a few seconds to our fellow coaches about when might it be time to encourage a referral or encourage them to seek that additional information? What could we see?
When change doesn't happen. Or when, and I said this at an ICF New Jersey meeting recently, I said, because it's mostly leadership and executive coaches, I said, if you're coaching a mentee or a coachee who is behaving in a way that you're confused by and doesn't make sense or feels illogical to them, assuming the coach is not ADHD, that might be a sign of their neurodiversity. And so, or when they keep doing the same thing over and over again, it's because their executive functions make it hard for them to learn and carry the learning forward. So that's would be a good sign of it.
Beautiful. I think that's really helpful for me. And I can think of some clients that I work with that I have had that same question. What is going on here? They seem to get it. It's not carrying forward.
Right.
And okay, the last question I have for you as a fellow coach is how do I raise this with my client that I'm noticing something? Because as you said, people come with shame and confusion and.
Yeah, we were trained to say what you see.
Yes, but say it with great care and compassion. So and when I work with new coaches, the direct communication aspect is very hard for them because they're afraid they're going to insult or hurt their client, right?
Right.
So we couch it in, I am noticing something that's got my attention. And this may be hard for you to hear, but are you open to hearing some feedback? Or are you interested in hearing my observation? Because remember,
permission.
We're asking permission. And then you can say something like, I am learning more about neurodiversity. Or I'm learning more about executive function challenges. And I'm wondering if this piece that you're struggling could be some aspect of that. So you're doing it with care and concern. You're not hitting them over the head with it. And I know we're coming out of time, but this piece of one sees that challenge to label it as a challenge, a difference, not a disability, and to recognize that might be how they internalize it, and to process and acknowledge, wow, this might be hard to hear. Be with the client in that emotion. We're not therapists, but as coaches, we deal with emotion, and we want to be with them in that too.
And I can't imagine a better spot to end the conversation, Diane. This has been fascinating for me. Lori?
Like John, I have been rapt listening and learning. I especially want to thank you, Diane, for giving us so many concrete examples for people to see themselves in it, for us as coaches to see our clients in that, and for, right at the end, that practical, kind way to bring this up to someone, because that's not an easy thing to do.
No.
People get defensive and, and resentful. So I really want to thank you, not only for the education, but for your assistance to me personally, and I'm sure to our viewers, in being able to support the clients that we work with, because no matter how brilliant you are and how high on the corporate ladder you are, you still can have things that happen to you or things that you do that you don't understand. And the more we understand, the more we can succeed. So I really appreciate this. It's been a fantastic conversation for me personally, and I'm sure for our listeners.
Well, I really appreciate the opportunity. I have so much more to say, but anyway, so I'd hate to end, but I also really respect the two of you and the questions that you brought. So that was just contributed so much to my ability to share information.
Diane, I have a feeling this is not going to be the last time we're going to have you on. So you have an open invitation anytime. Lori and I welcome you to URXcellent's Coaches Corner. And with that, I'm going to say a big thank you. This is your coach, JDP.
And Dr. Lori.
And always remember, you are excellent. We'll see you next time. Take care.